Good evening, everyone. My name is Gary Pinsky Adamsen, and along with E2E Treks executive producer Mark Montague, hi, we'll be your moderators this evening for our discussion, Negotiating Life on the Southern Border. We are joined tonight by our intrepid Continental Divide through hikers, Kelsey and Richard Mourant. Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Um, they were sadly on the trail during our last live event, so we are very happy to have them here with us tonight and in one piece, so even better.
Despite our better attempts.
Yes. So with us tonight is an impressive panel of amazing people dedicated to supporting and saving the borderlands in America's South, as well as folks who have lived and are still living in these areas. So to begin with, I'd like to introduce Teresa Martinez. Hello, Teresa. For over 30 years, Teresa has worked professionally to increase awareness, engagement, access, and stewardship of our entire national trail system. Teresa worked for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and from 2007 to 2012, she worked for the Continental Divide Trail Alliance. And since 2012, she has been the executive director and the co-founder of the Continental Divide Trail Coalition. She also serves on the board of the Partnership for the National Trail System. Teresa served as the chair of the Federal Advisory Committee to aid the USFS in the development of the Pacific Northwest National Scenic Trail. Teresa is actively involved in the creation of equitable spaces for all people in the outdoors and currently serves as the co-chair of the Next 100 Coalition. And happily, I can say, in 2019, Teresa was honored by the Virginia Tech College of Natural Resources as the recipient of the Gerald Cross Alumni Leadership Award. So welcome.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but I want to mention that the lands that we're talking about today are the borderlands of southern New Mexico, at least in one component, and those are the ancestral lands of the Tohono O'odham, as well as the Mescalero and Chiricahua Apache, and we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the ancestral people that have loved and stewarded these places long before we were here.
Thank you. So next, I would like to introduce Sergio Avila. Sergio is a Mexican-born wildlife biologist, a runner, and an immigrant living in Tucson, Arizona since 2004, and in 2016, he became a US citizen. Sergio holds a master's degree in arid lands management from the University of Baja California and a BS in biology from the University of Aguascalientes, both in Mexico. For over 20 years, Sergio has led collaborative efforts on connectivity for wildlife, habitat restoration, and public education in the US, Southwest, and Mexico's Northwest. Working with endangered species such as jaguars and ocelots, and learning from indigenous communities and fighting the construction of a border wall. Sergio works for the Sierra Club in the outdoor activities team, and his focus is to support staff and volunteers in New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, and Utah with the mission to connect all people with the natural world by maintaining and enhancing diversified, inclusive, and equitable volunteer-run outdoor activities that support the Sierra Club's conservation mission. I can also say that Sergio has 3 cats at home and a desert tortoise named Toby. So welcome, Sergio.
Gracias, Gary. Gracias, everyone. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here with you all. And I also want to acknowledge and start by saying I am coming to you from Tucson, Arizona, the ancestral lands and current lands of the Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui peoples who have lived in this region, in these beautiful deserts, even before the arbitrary political boundaries were drawn. So people have been here for a long time, and it is a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. The next person I'd like to introduce is Angel Pena. He's a first-generation Mexican-American and is a proud father of 3 and a public lands advocate. Over the last decade, Angel has been part of and led overwhelmingly successful efforts to protect landscapes and places that help capture the full American experience throughout the Southwest. And as the executive director of the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project, Angel works to ensure that frontera, borderland communities, leaders, they all have access to the political process and that their histories are reflected in public land management decisions. So welcome, Angel. Thank you for joining us.
Gary, un placer, and to everybody else, very excited to be part of this panel. Looking forward to the deep discussion I'm excited to have. And I keep my stuff and my family here in southern New Mexico, here in Las Cruces, the homelands of the Hornada Mogollon cultural traditions. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. Our next panelist is Ray Jaramillo Mcleod.
Jaramillo.
Yes. So Ray, he was born in and having grown up in Texas, he earned a master's degree, spent 2 years at the Met, and has been part of 6 Broadway shows and 5 Disney films. His television experiences have run the gamut from shows such as Law and Order to, wait for it, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Yes. Ray can also be heard on many numerous movie soundtracks. So welcome, Ray. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Pleasure to be here. I'm here located in Los Angeles today. I live in New York City, but I grew up in El Paso. I am a big hunk of Mescalero Apache with a little bit of Hopi and a little bit of Yaqua in there. And I'm happy to be here on this panel. It looks like everybody else is like doing a lot of hiking, and I think about hiking occasionally, if that's helpful.
Well, good. Yes, very helpful. Yes. And last but not least, rounding out our panel this evening, it's Emilio Delgado. In 2018, Emilio celebrated his 50th year in showbiz as a professional working actor. After obtaining his union membership back in 1968, he quit his day job and worked continuously as an actor and singer. And I'm sure you know by now that Emilio is best known for his long-running role of Luis on Sesame Street from 1971 until 2015. Emilio was born in Calexico, California, a small town that borders Mexico. He enjoyed a culturally rich and diverse childhood that embraced the music, the literature, and the language of both his American and Mexican cultures. He began performing in school plays and musicals and then studied at Cal Arts and additionally performed as a singer and guitarist in folk groups and Mexican romantic trios. Emilio began working as a professional actor in 1968 in the Emmy Award-winning PBS series Canción de la Raza. And then in 1971, the producers of Sesame Street in New York came to Los Angeles seeking to expand their cast to include Latinos and cast Emilio as Luis. Because of that casting choice, Emilio had the longest running role for a Mexican-American actor in a continuing television series for his 44 years on Sesame Street.
Whoa, yeah, 44 years. went by in a flash. Oh, yeah.
So welcome to you, Emilio, and welcome to everybody here this evening.
Oh, no, it's indeed an honor to be here with all of you, with all of your fantastic experiences and what you're working on. I'm proud to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. So, you know what? Let's just get right to the meat of the discussion.
Certainly. Well, I'd like to begin with some border history, specifically learning about growing up along the border here, the U.S.-Mexico border. And Emilio, I know you grew up along the border, crossing border for school and for work. Can you tell us a little bit about that, as well as how the attitude at the border is different now from what you experienced during your childhood?
Yeah, well, everything that I say, you're going to have to take into consideration that this was, when I was growing up there, this was 70 years ago when I was a kid. But it was quite an experience, living and going to school on opposite sides of the border. To me, at 10 years old, I mean, the border was, it didn't mean anything to me. I just, went across its line that everybody was supposed to show a passport or an identity card or whatever. All I said was American citizen. I had my books and they already knew me at the border. They let me through and I went to school. When I finished school in Calexico on the American side, I went back to Mexicali on the Mexican side. And I lived there with an extended family of grandparents and my mother and aunts and uncles and cousins all over the place. So yeah, it was quite a learning experience for me in terms of, well, I didn't consider it then a learning experience, but I mean, I was living in two different worlds, the Mexican side and the American side, you know. And later, you know, in my teens, before we moved up to Los Angeles, the whole thing was like I was still living on two sides of the border. I had mariachis and tacos and enchiladas on one side, and on the other side, I had rock and roll and hamburgers. You know, what can I tell you? That was quite an experience, which you know, which formed my personality.
So, Ray, I know
Yes.
you also grew up in Texas.
I
Grew up along the border as well. What was that like as a child in that area?
As Emilio said, there wasn't a lot of restrictions going across the border back and forth. We would walk over and they'd ask you if you were American, and you'd nod your head yes, and over you went. And then coming back, they'd ask if you're American, and you'd nod your head yes, and you'd come back. And it's not a big problem. We went primarily for the 25-cent drinks, and the what are you laughing at? Hey, when I went to high school, it was a long time ago. We're talking 50 years ago here. Come on. And obviously, in the years since, it has changed quite dramatically. And now I believe you're required to use a passport to get across. And my understanding, I had some friends tell me that they went across without a passport and had difficulty coming back into the United States. So it's been a long, slow change in the border policies over the years.
So what was one specific picture or memory that sticks in your head from your childhood being on the border?
Okay, you ready for this? My junior year, I was dating the prom queen.
As you do.
The prom queen in El Paso. And we decided after the prom that we were going to cross the border and going to Juarez and, you know, visit a few bars and party and, you know, drink because we were teenagers in high school. So she had on this long white dress and her crown and these white sparkly shoes that she couldn't walk 10 feet in. So when we finally got to the border, she said, "Can you carry me across?" And of course, in my foolishness, I said, "Sure." And I picked her up. Now, at that time, the bridge across from El Paso to Juarez was maybe a quarter of a mile long. By the time, you know, I got to the other side, I was like creaking and shaking. And she was happy as a clam. And of course, we had party, and then she wanted me to do it coming back. And sure enough, I did that. And I've had this pain in my lower back ever since.
So to say, you're such a sucker.
Oh my God! I have to tell you though, that when we got into the Mexico side, there were a group of guys that were sitting on the side of they had like a fenced walkway, right? And we got to the other side, and I'm carrying her in my arms. She's got her shoes in her hand and her crown in her head. And one of the guys said, "Hey man, you have yourself a queen."
God.
And
Nice.
this story reminds me a little bit of a story you told me about your grandparents. One of them
Well,
carrying.
yeah, that's a whole different thing now. As you may know, historically, the United States has only been invaded once, and that was by Pancho Villa.
Oh, yeah.
Pancho. So he went cruising into the town of Mimbres, New Mexico, which happened to be where my grandfather and grandmother were living at the time. Now, when Pancho Villa walked into Mimbres, the first thing he did was that he took all the men and captured them and jailed them and wouldn't release them. So the story goes, anecdotally, that my grandmother went in and spoke to Pancho Villa and got my grandfather released. Now, I don't know if spoke is a euphemism. I don't know what happened, but my grandfather got out. And if he hadn't gotten out, if it hadn't been for my grandmother, there would be no me.
Wow.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a memory. Okay.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah.
That one's stick in my mind.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, Raymond, you mentioned that bridge in El Paso.
Yeah.
My paternal grandparents came across that bridge from Ciudad Juarez when they first came to the United States.
Yeah.
That was the first place that they went to, and they paid a penny, one penny to come across.
And as you
Wow.
walked across, the Rio Grande River was not really much more than a creek. So there were always like 100 little kids down underneath the bridge, and they had these long sticks and paper cones on them. So you would throw dimes and nickels and stuff, and they would catch them in their little cones and make money that way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Guys, I know the puente you're talking about. My wife and I were just over there having dinner a couple weeks ago. That puente has a lot of memories in it, and I know how steep it is. So, Raimundo, homie.
Yeah.
I know, yeah, man, right? Yeah. I know that
Watch
puente.
your back. Watch
I know
your
that
back.
puente.
My back.
I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit from the beauty of the woman you're carrying across the bridge to the beauty of the border and the lands around here. And actually a little bit to Kelsey and Richard now. I just got them off the trail yesterday here. And, they've been experiencing, goodness, the wilderness, the beauty all around through the Gila here and coming down all the way from Montana. So like Kelsey and Richard, tell us one thing they feel is a misrepresentation that they'd like to dispel of what they've experienced along the southern border territories here.
Babe, do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
It's all you.
Okay. Well, I can speak to somebody from not really very far away when you think about it. I grew up in Oklahoma, and my tribe is the Chickasaws, even though I don't look it. But Oklahoma is always misrepresented whenever I go. I had somebody ask me once, do you guys wear shoes in Oklahoma? And I was like, why wouldn't we wear shoes? But so I know about misrepresentation of places, but coming here, I've never been to New Mexico before we started hiking the Continental Divide. And in my head, New Mexico was like Looney Tunes desert. Like, in Looney Tunes where it's just like a flat, barren desert with like one or two cactuses just like chilling in the middle.
And a roadrunner and a coyote.
Right, and a roadrunner and a coyote.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
Yes.
So that was my image of New Mexico. And so we come down here and we get into the Gila and it's teeming with life. And it's one of the most gorgeous places I have ever seen. Like walking along, we met Teresa actually near Skull Bridge near Santa Fe. And I was just literally speechless with how beautiful it was. Like you just think of the desert as this barren place, and no, there's literally the Gila's covered with trees. We're seeing life everywhere in all forms that I never expected. I've never seen so many tarantulas in my life. Like it's stunning in a way that I feel like people who are not in the Southwest area have no idea about. I feel like it's this gem that's like secret, and you can kind of hear that with people here too, where they're like, "Welcome," but shh. So that was a real big eye-opening experience for me to realize how incredibly gorgeous this was, and not in a way that anybody who's from the rest of America seems to realize, or even the rest of the world. I don't know what the rest of the world's perception of the Southwest is, but it's so stunning here, and that was something that was really eye-opening for me.
Well, I should add, though, that I played for the University of Texas football and basketball, and we weren't sure those people from Oklahoma ever wore shoes either.
What's it, Longhorns? But we do it this way.
Okay, well, so I'm from Africa, and we didn't wear shoes.
Yeah.
With all those snakes around.
Step on the puff adders.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So I wouldn't say that there was a misperception that I had about the southern border area, but I definitely felt an affinity for it because it reminds me so much of home. So to have that experience, to be in a foreign country and be walking in somewhere that felt like home, that was unexpected, but incredibly powerful to kind of see the conservation similarities between some of the issues that are happening in Africa and what's happening here. And it's, for me, watching those comparisons has probably been one of the most interesting things about this part of the hike. Being able to see tarantulas, being able to go and dig them out of their holes. I mean, that's what I used to doing in Africa. I wasn't expecting to do it here.
Yeah.
Well,
I do have one question to ask though. Sergio, what do you see as something that's really misrepresented down here on the southern border?
Well, it is the answer to the question you both addressed before, is precisely that idea that the desert is not a wasteland. that the desert is not just sand dunes with the two cactus standing, that I invite the audience to think where that stereotype comes from. Where does that image comes from? And not only that about the border, please also know that that beautiful nature, those rivers, those trees, those tarantulas go beyond the border. Nature has no borders. And so we cannot think that this beauty ends at the US-Mexico border, which is just an arbitrary line on the sand. In fact, there is a very profound way to see the beauty and diversity of the border when you start seeing where there are national parks along the border. You might think about Big Bend National Park in Texas. You might think about Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument in Arizona. But people don't know that those areas in the United States are connected to protected areas and national parks in Mexico that in fact create binational conservation areas that are more than 2 times, 3 times larger than just Big Bend. And so when 2 countries start protecting land based on nature and based on the diversity, it means that it's a stamp of acknowledgement of the beauty, the diversity, and the richness of this region in terms of nature and in terms of understanding that nature does not see borders. When you see those tarantulas, believe me, they don't know that they are in the United States. They don't speak English, they don't carry a passport, but they know where the food and the habitat and where the places to eat, where the restaurants and the hotels are. And so we would benefit a lot from this more natural vision of a place without boundaries, so we can understand that water flows on both sides, that rain comes on both sides, except in Mexico, maybe it's tequila that flows a little bit more in those creeks. But also that threats to these areas like climate change affect both sides of the border too. That the border is just an arbitrary line that does not divide the natural beauty or the natural threats. And I think that that's a very important thing for people to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Well, that sort of leads me into a topic that we wanted to discuss, and that's sort of in your wheelhouse, I guess, and Angel as well, discussing migration of animal and plant life in this area. I know, for instance, I had mentioned before about your studies with the jaguars and the ocelots, but there's also mountain lions and pygmy owls and the monarch butterflies that I remember that I would see here as a child all the time, and now I don't see at all anymore. So with what's happening currently in the world, what do you see, and this is a question for anyone, what do you see as the impact that a border structure has on not just the animal life, but the communities and the resources and the landscape of these borderlands?
Yeah, well, that's something that I have had the dubious pleasure of working on for the last 20 years. You know, I am not a resident, or I didn't grow up in the borderlands. So I also grew up with an idea of the border that was not what I found when I moved to Baja California and Chihuahua. Mm-hmm. And so I also had to learn and adapt and learn that this line didn't mean anything. And it's very clear, one thing to know is that history didn't start in 1776. It's very important that we acknowledge that people have lived in this region for millennia and that they have been the stewards of these lands and these waters. That the reason why we have those national parks, the reason why we have that great diversity is because they took care of that diversity for many years. And not only they took care of that, their cultures kind of merged with natural world, creating beautiful art, you know, being related to jaguars or to cats in a way. This is a native Mexican piece of art from the Huijarica or Huichol group in a little bit farther south. But this is a testament of the relationship of culture with nature. The correct names of mountains, the correct names of rivers that are not the colonized names. And one thing to acknowledge is that what we know today as the US-Mexico border, again, is an arbitrary line, but actually 200 years ago used to be farther north. you know, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California used to be part of what was known Mexico. And so because somebody made a political decision, the border moved to a different place and affected people in a different way. So it is very clear the impacts on animals not being able to migrate and move to new areas that they can live in, to find food sources or water, to adapt to climate change for those that need to live in cooler temperatures or higher elevation. And not only that, there is impacts to local human communities in places where the construction of the border wall comes in as an imposition for people like Emilio, who grew up crossing this place back and forth, not even knowing possibly that they were crossing back and forth. And now people cannot do it freely. You know, during my studies along the border, I personally had to stop some of these studies because these immigration policies and these border policies focus on what people look like, focus on racial profiling. So I had to stop research on jaguars because I have been under the gun from the Border Patrol. I have been harassed. I have been mistreated. This is why I became an American citizen. It's not because I'm living the dream. It took me 12 years from immigrating to Arizona to becoming a citizen. And in those 12 years, I did pay taxes and I wanted my full rights because I was treated like not even a second-hand citizen. I was treated like a half person, you know, doing these studies. I work for organizations or universities and I'm traveling with a lot of people, but it's always me answering extra questions, showing extra documents, having to speak very scientific and like, so that is an impact. It's an impact on me personally. It's an impact on local communities. It's an impact on water. And very importantly, it's an impact on the already existing collaboration between two countries working together to address much more important things than immigration policies or fear from one side, you know? People have been working for decades addressing climate change, addressing the migration of animals, working together for research to understand fire, to understand climate change. So there's a lot of impacts that go into local communities, indigenous communities, natural communities, and the work that we are doing on both sides. There's a lot of different impacts. They can be ecological, economic, social, and very importantly, the federal government in the US has a waiver to ignore all the laws in place to protect these places. So now it's a lawless place. We are forgetting about the rule of law. And to be quite honest, that's a problem for the whole country, not just for the borderlands.
True, yeah. You know, you had mentioned about the migration of animal life. One of the things that I learned as we were working on this project for this through hike was that the migration of animals such as the jaguars and the ocelots are being interrupted by any sort of boundary, any sort of wall that was created. It's not just the migration part of it, but it's also genetic diversity. If the animals cannot travel to find other animals, there will be very specific pockets of genetic traits in these areas, and now these genetic traits can't move beyond the wall to mix and mingle with other genetic traits within their species. So that's also something to consider when we're talking about borderlands right now. Although there's also one other point that I'd like to make and to ask. Teresa, when we actually get to the CDT terminus, there's no wall there. What is it that we will see there at the terminus?
Well, you know, you were asking about misconceptions of what people experience when they get to the monument. And the CDT is unique, and sort of to Sergio's point, the Continental Divide National Scenic Trail is a congressionally designated resource. And the reason it's designated the way it is it's intended to protect the nationally significant natural, cultural, historic resources along its corridor. So when you think about these nationally significant, there is no other place in the world where the Chihuahuan Desert exists. There's no other place. While it might be similar to Africa, it does not exist in its form anywhere else in the world. There's nothing much more nationally significant than that landscape. And I tell people all the time when they ask me, what's your favorite place of the CDT? And they expect me to say Glacier National Park or Rocky Mountain National Park. Thoughts are with everyone in Rocky Mountain right now. But it's not, it's always the boot heel. It's the boot heel of New Mexico. And the reason is it's the most wild, and it's fragile and harsh and beautiful and warm. And it can seem rough on the outside, but once you start to look at it and experience it, you find this softness and delicateness that only exists in this landscape. And it's the ocotillo blossoms, it's the calibres, the hummingbirds that come in only at a certain time of the year. I've been there, I've seen badgers, yes, badgers, and I've seen snow geese, and I've seen golden eagles, and I've seen coyotes and fox and desert bighorn sheep in the middle of the desert. It has this richness and vibrancy that exists nowhere else in the world. So when we talk about these conflicts, when you get to the border, there's a single obelisk, and then there's a 6-strand broken down fence. And that's it. Like you can literally step over. I don't do it because to Sergio's point, I'm afraid to go over into Mexico because I'm afraid they'll make me stay. But, and I'm not joking, I kind of am and I'm not. Because like Sergio, I have been, doing work in the CDT for the CDT down in the boot hill. I've had a Border Patrol helicopter come over me with rifles pointing at me and people I'm taking to the monument. I've been pulled over on I-10. And then they see me, and I'm always very deliberate in wearing outdoor clothes that definitely look like I came from REI so that I don't look like just your average person, because you need to kind of present a certain way. And then they've started calling me because we run a shuttle down there, the CDT lady. So they know me now, which is great. But when you get there, it's just not what you expect, because it is literally a 6-strand broken down fence that you can literally walk over to the other side. And the other side of the border is actually agriculture. There's a Mennonite farming operation where they grow beans and all sorts of other things. And then on our side, it's wilderness study. And so you look forward, looking at the big Hatchet Ridge, and you're just like blown away by it's 12,000 foot peaks. There can be, I was telling Richard and Kelsey, you could get snow there Sunday night. It's not uncommon to have snow in the desert. I mean, who thinks of snow in the desert? And when you see it, it's amazing. But when you're there, it's quiet. It's the loudest quiet you will ever hear. And it immediately strips you of any concept of that you are anywhere else but one on the Continental Divide and 2 in the Chihuahuan Desert. And you have this immediate respect for that landscape because there's nothing there. And then if you think and imagine of a wall coming, and just imagine right now, nothing. And then this very artificial, tall structure, just from the aesthetics alone. Let's not even talk about wildlife and the ocelot and the jaguar and the Coues deer and the Montezuma quail and all the other things that need that space to move, and people who need to come to a divide that actually comes together versus, divides us. This is where we actually come together. And so that wall just immediately would create a separation from the landscape, from human, humanness, from being human, and then just in your own way, it just takes away. You immediately know it's developed, and it's not wild, and it's not special, and it's just a wall. And I think that's the stripping that, on the emotional side, from the aesthetic perspective, all the stories that Raymond and Emilio, you tell, my parents tell, my dad grew up in Brownsville, Texas, that I know Angel and all of us have stories of that region. Those are gone. A history and a legacy and a specific part of the American experience is gone. And I think that's the CDT, we only deal with one part, but from my personal perspective, I think that larger concept is just devastating to me. But being there, you immediately feel the magnitude of both the uniqueness of what is there now and what will change when a wall comes in, if it comes in, and obviously we're fighting that. And I will add one additional thing. We manage a trail that runs 3,100 miles, and Kelsey and Richard and the whole team have been hiking it. And this is something I learned from Sergio a couple of years ago when we did a panel, and it was profound to me. And, we manage a trail that people come to recreate on, and they hike 3,100 miles with $5,000 worth of gear and all these things. But there are people who are hiking or walking because their life depends on it. And they're coming to this place, not with the leisure or the privilege of vacation. They're coming with the reality, it's their life depends on it. And to me, you know, they hike more than 3,100 miles. They're hiking 5,000 miles, 6,000 miles with their children to escape life, to escape climate change, to escape, you know, something very, very bad. And a wall immediately says, we're not home for them anymore. And I think that's devastating to me on a human level. From where the trail is, I think that sort of comparison of people doing this because their life depends on it and people who are doing this because it's fun, it just changes that conversation, the reality. So I know you asked me about what it's like at the border, but that's what it's like for me. I have all of those emotions in one moment when I'm at that border. The immensity of what that experience means is all of those things because there's no wall there now.
I'm reminded when we have this discussion about the words on the Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, your poor, and your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, and then have to walk up and walk into a wall. It's just like, this can't happen.
And if I can add also, that also impacts even the recreation opportunities for like the Continental Divide Trail and other trails. Like, let's acknowledge that it is white people who just hike the trail. If it was people of color, you would be harassed. You would have very much difficulty. That's why Teresa has to dress in a certain way. So let's acknowledge that the impact is profound even into the future. Like, if there are not a group of people represented today in recreation, through hiking, in hunting, in science, in conservation, then our future generations won't have anybody to aspire to be like, and we won't have a model. And so, yes, white people see Richard and they're like, oh, I can go hike that thing, no problem. Yeah, you can, right? But if it's people like me, I actually don't do those tours. I don't take people to the border because I know that it's risky for people. So there's an acknowledgement. The other thing I want to say is that while I've been working 25 years on both sides of the border, people always refer about Mexico in terms of fear and violence and drugs. But the violence is here. Look at where the shootings happen. Look at where the policies happen. So the stereotype of violence is very widespread about Mexico, and everybody, high schools, hotels, clubs in the United States get shootings, movie theaters, there are shootings, right? And we don't talk about that. That's not in the media. And so it creates a narrative for a country that the events definitely happen, but they affect the country in a way because of this narrative of fear. And it affects ultimately places like the Continental Divide Trail because a good section of the population will not feel safe going to these places.
So I have something to bring in here that was quite different for me in coming over here. I'm also an immigrant. I'm not from the US. And when we made the decision to live in the US, I had to go through a long immigration process. And I remember the part of it where I actually had no papers, literally no papers that said I was legal in the country. And I wanted to go and do a recreational hike. I wanted to go and do the Arizona Trail, which starts at the Mexican border. And I couldn't do it. There was way too many lawyers and legal people in the world that said, Richard, if you go and do that hike, you will get pulled over and you will be deported and you'll never be able to come back into this country. So I think that every person who comes into this country, there isn't a stigma against immigration, no matter where you're from. And that was an amazing experience to be told that I can't do something that was just recreational, go and have a hike, because I'm not from here and I will be deported.
Yeah.
It was a very strange experience.
I agree with it, but I will also say that your experience as a white man is very unique and it doesn't go through generations, whereas the experience of people of color goes through generations It affects intergenerational trauma.
Oh, very much agreed.
People have lost their land, their food, their culture. So yeah, you might have a sad story, but you know what? You're still a white guy. You still speak English, and understand that that's a privilege. There's other people that are not willing to take that risk, or take that risk at the threat of death. And so
I'm agreeing and saying, having experienced just a small percentage of that, I can understand how much pressure and how much self-doubt there is in what you do with that pressure on top of you. It's incredible.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why we're partnering with the Next 100 Coalition as well, and the various groups that they're involved with to also help bring recreation and bring this beauty of the nature and the stewardship of the land back to people of color of all nations, of all backgrounds as well. And it's also something that, for me, the stories of Emilio and Raymond growing up on the border, being able to cross back and forth and experiencing the beauty and wonder of music and the arts and food and culture when it was simply open compared to what it is now for anyone. It's just so sad to see that this nation has lost that beautiful experience for its people. And it's something that, to me, these stories need to be brought back out more about what it really truly was and what it should be now. And we have real experiences to draw from, to show people and to eliminate that fear and eliminate that misinformation that's been put out there so much, and eliminate that division that's created from that lack of representation and lack of information out there. And that's again why I'm so honored and so thankful for you guys to be on this panel with us today and to be able to talk about life on the southern border and all these different aspects of it. It truly is tremendous.
Well, you know, the one thing I wanted to say though, when you talk about the border, it was never really open. When I was growing up on the Mexicali side, shining shoes on the streets of Mexicali, I saw all the people that came from the interior of Mexico to right there where the borderline was, just waiting in the streets. You know, they wanted to get into the United States. They needed to get out from where they were because, you know, they didn't have food, they were hungry, no jobs, whatever. They figured that America, you could get a job, right? And the people were lying on the streets right next to the fence, sleeping overnight, waiting for the chance to somebody say, okay, you, and then they go in. It was not, even then it was not an open border at all. Of course, I felt lucky because I was an American citizen and I could go back and whatever. But I saw all that misery of those people that needed to get out from where they had been because they wanted to go to America. And the reference that Raymond made of the Statue of Liberty reminded me of an E.E. Cummings poem, I think, that ended up when he said, you better bury the Statue of Liberty because it's starting to stink like hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, Emilio, I want to say, I just want to thank you for bringing that out. You know, honestly, born and raised here on the Frontera, I never felt welcome until recent. It was never cool to be brown until the last 3 or 4 years, right? My family, my grandfather who brought me to this country, you know, for all the reasons, I'm raising a beautiful family here with great opportunity. But I remember one time, one of the questions was, what's your memory of the border? And I remember one time we were crossing the puente and we were in a van and the air conditioner didn't work. And my uncle wanted us to roll the windows down and he got like beat by my grandpa. That's just how machismo worked back then, right? Because we needed to be American. We needed to look American and Americans had air conditioner. And so you raised that window up. And so, yeah, it wasn't always open and accepting. And then just the statement on the Statue of Liberty, and to close out, Sergio, thank you for saying your words, sir, and calling that stuff out. But it would be beautiful if the southern border was just as American as the Statue of Liberty. It would be awesome if the southern border was just as American as the Grand Canyon or Las Vegas, for crying out loud, or New York, or the dropping of the apple for New Year's. How American is that, right? Why can't we be proud of the tradition, the cultures and the deep-rooted history we have down here. Because my neighbor, I have a neighbor who tells me stories how the border crossed her, how her roots and traditions, because of the 200 years ago, she was in Mexico, or her family just a couple hundred years ago was in Mexico, and she's confused about that, right? As an abuelita now, what are the stories she tells her grandchildren, and how do they carry those traditions forward? So yeah, just a couple, wanted to get my thoughts in there. Thank you for the opportunity.
You know, I think one of the main reasons that we are gathered today to have this discussion is Kelsey, before this meeting, before this Zoom live event, had mentioned a word to me that I think is key to all of this, and that's education. I think I learned nothing about the border when I was in school. Not one thing, nothing. All 12 years of public school, nothing.
Actually, I would challenge that. You learned one thing, but it wasn't what it was. It wasn't reality.
Yes.
You learned Mexico was there, and
Yes.
you learned that this was the United States, but no one told you that Mexico went all the way to Oregon and Washington.
Right.
And that
That's true.
no one told you that everything before the Louisiana Purchase was Mexico.
Yep.
You know, and they didn't say that. It was American. And so
Yep.
that's the difference. And so that was the creation of this misunderstanding. You know, it's always Bugs Bunny. I meant to turn a left at Albuquerque.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I grew up on this commercial, those cartoons. I mean, my family was originally from, we can trace them back to 1700s, at least that far, to Nuevo Leon in Mexico. And then my father's family is from Brownsville. My mother's family is from Dripping Springs, Texas. And they were migrant farmers. My dad he talked about it himself. He was a lettuce picker in Brownsville, you know, and that's not how we grew up. But, you know, my parents didn't speak Spanish in the house because they didn't want us to speak with an accent, because it wasn't not just cool. It wasn't okay to be brown,
Right.
because we were just almost disenfranchised from owning our relationship to this amazing planet and landscape. And so I didn't mean to cut you off, Gary, but I just feel like you did learn. It just wasn't the truth.
Right. Yeah, no, that you're absolutely right. And I think one thing that we need to do, that we need to strive for, is better education, and not just education with like, okay, let's come up with a definition for this or that, but an actual, truthful, honest definition of what these words mean, and of what these areas are, what they really are, and what they really were. You know, do you think? Oh, well, then let me ask this question: How do you think we can change through education these definitions that we have been brought up to learn? How do we relearn that? How can we deconstruct them and build them back up so that they're truthful, honest definitions? Replace them with real designations. And that's a question for everybody. You know, what's the best way to go about doing that?
I've had a lot of thoughts about this, and I think the most deep penetration of those concepts in the United States is through music. And I think that the people who perform the music that have Spanish heritage to it, I think the responsibility of much of it should lie on their shoulders to give you the history of that cultural input, so that everybody can understand where the influx came from and where the basis of all that is. And I think that's easily the most visible and most easily reachable means to reach a lot of people.
Well, I was going to just say really quickly, I think it starts with Raymond and Emilio, you two. It starts with role models, and it starts with representation. It starts with our padres. You know, it starts with our parents telling us that we belong, and that, you know, we have to know where we come from so we can know where we're going, and to educate ourselves, and to not take it for granted, and to not take it as a privilege, but to earn it and to work hard for it.
Yes,
but it takes role models, and it takes barrier breakers. It takes barrier breakers, and then it takes our generation to come in and continue to break down those walls and those barriers, and to continue to create opportunities, not so that people can be like, well, I suffered, so you have to suffer, but more
Right.
that you don't have to suffer. You're still going to probably find some hardship, but you won't have to do what I did. I'm going to lift you up as I'm lifting us up, and the work that I can do. And I think, you know, the conversations we're having now and the opportunities to just, you know, I can't not fangirl it. You know, Luis is on this point right here. We grew up watching you, and it told us it was okay to be brown. And I'm going to try not to cry.
Yes.
It was okay to not be brown.
Yes.
You know, it was okay to be Mexicana. It was okay to be from where we were. And like, that is real.
You'd be surprised how many people have come up to me over the years and said exactly that. You were the only brown person, the only person that looked like me on television. And that was really something with the part of Luis. When Luis came on television on Sesame Street in 1971, up to then, you know, the images of Latinos, Mexicans, whatever, on television and films was, you know, there were awful images that you wouldn't want to, you know, but that's what happened with Luis. And I was proud. One of the proud things about Luis was that here on the show, on a national television show, this human being came on the air, on the show, and he was a regular person. He had a wife, he had a family, he had a business. He was like just a regular person, you know. And I think that was very important to start changing the images that had been, you know, up to that time put upon everybody in the United States. Mm-hmm. And the other one small thing that to this day I really am always trying to do. It seems that in the United States of America, a lot of white people have a problem saying the word Mexican.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
They have a problem every time, and I hear it all the time. They kind of skip, or they swallow, or something. They don't pronounce Mexican. Are you Mexican? You know. So what I do, especially when I go to schools, you know, and I visit people, I say to them, Mexican. Everybody looks at each other like, what? And I'll say it, Mexican. And I keep repeating the word Mexican, especially with young children that are Mexican. They need to be proud that they are Mexicans, you know. But and also with the other kids, the white kids or whatever, need to know that it's not a bad word. It's Mexican. Say it with a smile.
Yeah.
Say it proud. You know.
Agree, and that brings up into breaking some narrative and having role models. I agree on the idea that I love Ray's idea that music would be a way to share and change the narrative. I really think that we need to give a voice to those who haven't had a voice, to all the Emilios and the Teresas, 4 generations who have experience, who have a life, and can pass those experiences in their own stories. And instead of reading the same stories from white people who tell you that you are divided basically based on what you look like. You know, one of the, for me, the sort of realizations when I did my citizenship test was that they test you on history, and it is so horrible. It is horrible. Like, Native Americans don't exist in that book. Mm-hmm. They jump very quickly. Mm-hmm. They leave out 150 years of history of genocide of Native American people, of removal, of killing, of boarding schools. So those people were removed from national parks, were removed from places that now everybody gets to go and enjoy and hike and like in Yosemite and Yellowstone. But you never consider that those places are in fact empty of the voices, of the colors, of the laughter, of the food that they used to have. A lot of people say national parks are America's best idea. If I was a Native American, I would say national parks are America's worst idea, because that's how people lost their lands and they lost their culture and they lost their food. I mean, they still exist and they still live in this country, but their life is so different because of that colonization. And another way I think that we can help close this gap is through nature. Like, we expose people to nature without thinking of fear, without thinking of boundaries, without thinking of languages, and instead just enjoying those rivers and those valleys and those mountains, and understanding that when Teresa was talking about the terminus of the Continental Divide Trail, You didn't say there's caravans on the other side of the border just walking, right? You didn't say that there's thousands of people walking across. You didn't say that there's roads and cars, and there's nothing of that. That does not exist. Mm-hmm. So we need to give the voice to those who have not had a voice.
Mm. You know, building on what you had just said, okay, so we do have currently in this country, we do have these national parks. How can we incorporate national park usage with education? So that way we understand, okay, this is a national park. It's been designated national park land and that it is to be preserved, but here's the cost. This is the cost of this national park, of this land being designated a national park. How do we get from us discussing that to it being taught, to it being learned? Is it something that is it possibly something that the Park Service can be brought in on, the Forestry Service? I know Teresa's laughing because I know what the answer is going to be.
Yeah, I'm laughing at that too.
Yeah.
You know,
so what we do is we use our privilege to elevate somebody else. We use our privilege instead of us being, when the microphone comes to our face, we pass it to somebody else. When the interview comes to us, we allow somebody else to speak. And so that is something that Sierra Club is doing. We're supporting indigenous communities, helping with our platform, with our brand, with our resources to elevate the voice of the Odan people defending the border, to elevate the efforts of the Huichin people defending the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So we give voice to people in Bears Ears to defend a sacred site in Utah, in the Four Corner area, that now is a national monument. It's been in the media for 15 minutes, but as a sacred place, it has existed for millennia. So we need to, instead of us looking for the answers to do how to do it, we give our privilege and our resources to somebody else to share their story.
See, and that's what it is. That's what it's really all about, being able to elevate someone else to a position where they can tell their story. And that's the education. That's where we can get the real definitions of these words. Conservationism, environmentalism, they're great. Those definitions exist in Merriam-Webster. That's fantastic. But there's a truth to them. There's a cost.
There's a cost.
Well, and I'm going to pass it to my good friend Angel, because I want him to talk about the work they do with Nuestra Tierra conservation project, because I think the other part of it, aside from, you know, talking about leadership and organizational bureaucracies and the ways that we can influence that when we're in positions of power, and creating more opportunities for people like us to be in these conversations and these positions of power. But it's also starting with the children and instilling in them and young people their own sense of ownership and pride, and starting to help them say the word Mexican without any, you know, any hesitation. So I would ask Angel, like, the work that you guys are doing on Nuestra Tierra and how that has been, you know, I think it's just profound to me, and it's one of my favorite things that is working, that is happening now.
Ms. Teresa, thank you so much for the opportunity. And while everyone was talking, only one word kept popping in my mind is authenticity, right? I have found in over a decade in trying to figure out what public land conservation should look like or how we can get there. That's the one thing I feel like I've taken away throughout my career. Which is why I spent most of that career working for a big green organization doing some awesome things, and then being given the tools and being I was given the tools, and then I kind of had a eye-opening moment for me that I was being tokenized. That had been 10 years of my life where I was the articulate brown kid. I was the articulate brown young person that could remember what a bill number was, right? When I realized what was happening, I quit that job, I left that, and we started the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project, where every day we wake up not only ensuring that overlooked frontera communities have access to public lands and waters, but that they are authentically at the table, drafting policy, sharing their lived experiences as experts, as folks on the ground who have everything to lose because they live there, their parents live there, they live there for generations, and in some of these communities for millennia. And so thank you, Ms. Teresa, for the opportunity. And that's exactly where we apply our resources and time, is in that next generation, to make sure that those folks are authentic, that they know about our cultura, that they know about our tradition, so that it's not policy agendas, but it's just like, hey, man, this is my life, and this is what I'm going to do for my family.
Right.
This is something that I'm proud to push
Right.
forward. But thank you.
No, I feel very honored that I get to be part of this conversation with all of you. We tend to, I tend to sometimes say, oh no, I get it, I understand. At this point in my life, I know that I'll never understand and I'll never get it, because I haven't lived it. And no matter how many times I'm told a story, told a situation, I still won't be able to get it, because I'm not living it. It has not weighed on me like it has weighed on others who are telling their story. And which is why I'm very happy to be able to, let's elevate all of these stories. Let's elevate everyone here so that these stories get out there and education can happen slowly, but it can happen. I was thrilled when I agreed to sign on to work on this project. Richard and Kelsey and Mark had told me the one thing, every time I see a wonderful nature documentary, it's pretty trees, look at the squirrel, look at the whale, look, clouds in the sky, that's great. The one thing that's always missing, the people and their culture. I love Attenborough, I love BBC, the people and the culture. And that's why I was so excited to be part of this project, because of conversations like this that I would have never been able to be a part of. And I'm really, really glad that all of you agreed to come on tonight and have this discussion with us, an honest discussion, a very frank discussion about what is happening and how we can not fix, but how we can build on
Together.
this. Yeah, together.
Together.
Yeah.
That's part of what's so important about how we've structured this as well, is even though the hike is wrapping up this week and we'll start working on the editing of all these stories that we've uncovered, this very Zoom event experience is what we intend to do going forward, so that we have a platform for the voices for everyone to be able to continue these discussions and bring more people into that discussion and bring this out to the general public as well, who are hunkered down right now for COVID in the various locations, and really are open and welcoming these real stories, and will make a huge difference in the future as we come out of this COVID experience in some way or another as well.
Well,
You know, go ahead.
Can I add one little thing? Because I want to mention something back to what Raymond said. You know, I think of music as well. And I always think of Linda Ronstadt, who was, you know, like every woman my age growing up, she was like who we idolized. My dad was in love with her. You know, when she came out with Canciones de Mis Padres, it was like earth shattering for our family. Like that was on constant play all the time. But, you know, there's Lila Downs. There's all these people who like continue that tradition of this music. And I think music is, and I want to mention that it's also not always heavy. You know, we have a lot of fun. This is fun. It is heavy. It is hard work. And I know with Angel, you know, we do discadas all the time, which I know one of these days we're going to get you down on the border. We're doing a disco. And if you don't know what that is in the audience, you need to figure it out, because it is the best thing on the planet ever. And it's totally a heart stopper, literally. A lot of grease, but it's delicious. But it's fun because this culture and where we come from, you know, we come with this passion for life, for our family, for our culture, for our community, for the people who come before us, the people who are coming after us. You know, there's so much love. It's a lot of love. I mean, we're fighting for these places because we love them. And so it isn't always heavy. You know, it is a lot of fun. I know there's a lot of laughter. Angel and I have had some fun times in the woods. We won't go there, but you know, tequila. Ain't gonna lie. And I think that's
fishing. We were fishing, and we were also fishing.
Fishing.
It's like part of a.
Okay. We were fishing at midnight on Lake Robert. That's when you fish. But it is fun. And I think think that that's the other dynamic part, that there's so much to share and so much fun to be had, that this isn't all just, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think that's the other piece of it, through music, through fun, through these things that really, you know, lift us up as from a soul place. Is just such a great opportunity. And I'm just so grateful to have, you know, such great role models and to have such great colleagues and such great allies and accomplices in this work. Because that's the other thing I will mention, is it's not just us. It's us. It's a we. It is a we, and we need all of us. This isn't a yes, but it's a yes and. And we need everybody on this path with us and on this journey with us. And I say that because it is an opportunity for us to really create something that hasn't happened yet in our world. And we really, I'm grateful, you know, just so grateful that we have this chance to have this conversation, that Richard and Kelsey wanted to do this on this CDT, this divide that unites, this thing that brings us together, that tells all these stories across the culture, across continents, across communities. It's amazing to have the opportunity to connect to art, to music, to culture, to science, to, you know, these things that are just, it's interconnected. We're not separate. And so I just say that because it's fun, it's passionate, that's what we bring, you know, and I'm just so grateful that we can have these conversations.
Well, one thing I would like to say is that this conversation is obviously will go well beyond this meeting, this discussion, and I would love it if, because we're still going to be doing these Zoom meetings, I would love it if we could all come back together after this year's election and discuss further.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, there's that elephant in the room. I forgot.
Oh, yeah, that
yeah,
little
sure.
thing. Yeah.
So
That
in this
big
game,
happening.
it's just not true.
Gosh, oh man.
I think I would love it if we could all get back together in 2 months' time and discuss and see what's new future, what new ways that opportunity to build. Yes, to see what will present itself after the 3rd of November.
Some still hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll have a discussion on the border with Emilio and the pink martinis and Ray jumping in there as well.
Don't even tempt me with the good time, guys. We'll get that on the calendar and we'll make it happen.
Go fishing again?
Sergio's been down there. Sergio's been down there with us.
Oh, I'm there.
Yeah,
I'm already
yeah.
packing.
Let's get back out there, man.
I can drive that place with my eyes closed, so I'm ready. Just let me know.
I have heard nothing but wonderful things from Teresa about what I am missing at a disco.
It's a disco, man.
I'm pretty much, I'm ready.
I want to thank.
And I have to say,
everyone
these
for
virtual
joining
margaritas are
us.
not working
But
for me.
B, I'd love to thank everyone for helping us raise awareness. I mean, we're not a very big operation, and we've never been people coming into this with wanting to take a lot out. Our whole goal of doing this was to give back and to help raise awareness, because there's so many things that people just don't know about. So when we were talking about the education of bringing that out, as much as art and so on have a great way of communicating, I think the communication out of education and the raising of awareness that meetings like this can bring is an incredible, incredible opportunity. And we are so immensely grateful for your help in that, raising awareness.
Yeah.
I must say ditto, because I think without you, our panel, we wouldn't even be able to begin to understand and begin to learn, which is what we need to do. I would like to personally thank each and every one of you. I want to thank Teresa and Ray and Angel and Sergio and Emilio, our hikers who made it back in one piece to be part of this conversation tonight. Our executive producer, Mark, for helping get all of this together tonight. What we will be doing in the future is more of this. I would definitely love to get this group back together to continue this conversation because it needs to be continued.
I have so many more questions.
Yeah. This conversation just created more questions. So,
Just say the word, Gary. Say the word.
good.
That's the way that we have to engage in conversations. People are not used to having difficult conversations.
Right.
There are people who live in comfort, just accepting all those stereotypes and accepting the mainstream narrative, and are never challenged, you know, in that narrative by different experiences.
Right.
I also thank the opportunity that you created, because I have some expertise, but without you creating this panel, my expertise is hollow, right? Like I'm just having a lot of, it all lives in my head. And so this is the part of that, it's a reciprocal relationship. Like we will come in to support your panel and share these experiences, and you create the panel and you put it up online and people are watching. I would be very interested to see people's questions and comments and follow up on those. But let's understand that it is a reciprocal relationship. Our knowledge would not go anywhere without the opportunity and the technology to do it here. So I'm thankful for everybody's being here and the invitation, and what a wonderful time. I'm ready for that discada. I'm ready.
Teresa, you've started a chain of worms that's just going to go downhill.
I'm telling you, when this whole COVID thing is over, the disco on the border, and I know the peoples. I know these and I've got a big one, so we're set.
Her disco is nice, I will say that.
You don't have to tempt me with a good time.
Well, okay.
So before I check out, I got to go here in a second. I would just like to say, sunny day. Things A-okay. Yes, Mr. Emilio, thank you for being here.
On my way. Yeah.
There we go. Goodbye,
I definitely want to thank all of you guys that put it together, and you guys that are trekking, Rick and Kelsey and Mark and Gary. You guys did a tremendous job helping people and bringing all of these issues up so that everybody, all of us, can talk about it and get something done sometime. And I admire your effort very much. And thank you for having me on.
And a pleasure meeting all of you.
It's a pleasure with being with the rest of you as well.
Thank you. I want to do one quick plug too for everybody out there watching and everybody else's things. We have a create page on our website. It's designed specifically for anybody out there that wants to express anything in any kind of arts, whether it's written, poetry, song, dance, sculpture. Please submit on our create page so we can get your voice out there as well. So we can show that art in relation to the land, to the people, to the cultures, to nature, everything. Please, share the words, and share your culture, and we want to get out there as much as possible. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. It's tremendous.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
Thank you guys so much, and I look forward to seeing you all again. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Have a great time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Adios.
Adios.
Bye, Teresa.
Till next one.
Yes.